Right, so when I'm working on a project like this, especially on the prototypes, I always have the next project in mind. So I didn't originally do a sequencing on this. I did the cut list. I drew the drawings, right? I did a cut list, but I didn't do the sequencing yet because I just thought, oh, I'll come out to the shop and figure a few things out. And then, so as I'm doing this, I am also now writing the sequence for prototype number 2, which is coming up, at some point, right? So on this, in here, I have to decide now, when do I want to do like the roundover? When do I want to do the sanding? When do I want to do the varnishing? Now, a lot of me says to actually do some of the varnishing, some of the roundovers and some of the varnishing and sanding before it's even glued up, because it just makes things a lot easier to get in here. And the glue doesn't stick to the varnish, so that would be really easy to get off, right? But that's going to vary with the project. So for right now, I'm just going to say glue or sand, then glue, question mark, and then I'll think about that after I'm done here. So for right now, what I want to do is I want to round over, and what I'm doing for round over, I typically use a let's see, what is that? It's a 1/4 inch radius bit with a bearing on it. That's pretty much my go-to. I have it mounted on any number of 18-volt tools, either Milwaukee or Makita. And then, again, it's really stable. Plus, I put the pad down. I did bring this out because, again, you can get these router pads or these woodworking pads at a woodworking shop. They're a little thicker, but you can also use something like this, which is you put them under rugs, I guess, or something. No, this is a drawer liner that you pick up at Walmart or something, right? And then they also have those things, those non-stick pads for rugs, and those work actually pretty well. And I think they're a lot less expensive. So the sequence here, again, I'm going to add it to the notes, would typically be, for me anyhow, I find it's when something like this, because I'm going to be using a roundover, to me it's better to sand first, then roundover. Because otherwise, if you use the roundover, then you sand, you kind of basically destroy some of that roundover, depending on how fine it was. So I'm going to do a little sanding. Now, obviously, the sander is not going to fit inside there. That's another reason why I use Gorilla Glue. If it were, there's a couple of spots in here that could use some sanding. They're Gorilla Glue, but normally I'm not going to have any. Normally, the scraper will completely remove them, and then if I had to, I could sand inside there. But that's another reason why, again, I'm thinking about possibly doing the sanding, roundover, and varnishing of the pieces before I even assemble them. Just making sure that I don't get glue into the groove or on the tongue, right? But so I'm done with that. Now I can go ahead and with the I-beam for shape, you can either round over, up here like this, or you can flip it and do it that way. It all depends on your preference and whatever. Again, a topic I'll spend a little time on now because I won't later on future prototypes, but as long as we stick with the plan, what did I call it? The basic or the baseline, as long as we stick with that, then we have enough distance from here down so that bearing is not going to hit this, right? If we change something, which is fine, we just have to always be aware, every action has a reaction or something like that. But so if I were to want to do one where I offset that, and there are times where I'm going to want to offset the groove in here, and I may move it way close to the edge or for whatever reason, like on beds and things like that. But then if that's offset and that thing is sticking up there, we may not be able to get that in there, or we're going to resort to a micro or mini router bit, something like that. But you can see what the flexibility that we've got right now. So I'm able to round over right in there. It's a non-issue. So I was able to round over everything, and except here, which was pre-planned, right? If you recall, when I selected this wood, I went, oh, that's actually, I like that. Because that's my style, is trying to keep a little bit of waning, a little bit of saw curve and stuff like that. Again, this is just a prototype, that's it. Now, I did not round over any of these edges here because these are intended to be cut off. So whenever we're designing a project that uses a beam like this, an I-beam, a micro beam, then I'm almost always going to want to do it where the beam is at least a half inch, if not a full inch longer than it needs to be. So I can do all the glue up, not have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. I don't even have to wipe it off. I will. There we go. But you don't even have to do that because that's going to be a cutoff anyhow. So that's where we're at on that. Now we'll look at the next step of what it is that we're going to do, which is basically, I am going to just trim those edges off. Okay, so I'm fortunate enough to own some of these nice larger saws. This is a 12-inch DeWalt, relatively relatively model, a couple years old. I also have a Milwaukee 10-inch. That's the battery one, the 18-volt. But even that one has a sliding compound, so it has a pretty good capacity. But you're also, that's a 10-inch, and with the capacity, one of the things you have to look at is the height of what's the distance from this washer right here to basically to the table, because that's going to dictate the actual height of the capacity, whereas the distance is a non-issue, right? I can come out, I think, almost 12 or 13 inches with it. Same thing with the Milwaukee. You can come out quite a ways here. I think it's around 11, 12 inches, if not more. But the height is going to be an issue. So I don't know that this would work. In fact, yes, it would. So as long as I stay with this design and the board dimensions that I used on this, then we know we're okay with that saw. So if anybody else is building this, you're going to have to take that into consideration. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut those ends off. So again, because this is a prototype, I don't have really any specific length to cut, but I can tell you a couple of things. One is be really careful that you don't make it too thin, because you have this issue with it going down into here. The other issue is that it goes up into the blade itself, which can really, bang things up a lot. So that's why it's nice to lay out the length at least an inch longer. That way your cutoff is going to be at least a half inch. So I'm going to take about 3/8. And the other thing is, remember, there's no fasteners on this. There's no screws, there's no metal. So you don't have to worry about any of that stuff yet. You're going to see that on some of the projects where, like on a bed, where there's a mattress that might come off of this bottom flange, for instance, then I'm going to put fasteners in, or recommend fasteners from the bottom up, because you're not going to see them anyhow, and then they're going to hold a huge amount extra pressure on that part. As long as in the sequence, if we follow the sequence laid out for like a bed, then it's going to say in there, wait until after the glue up, or at least until after you cut these off, before you install those fasteners, because they can certainly be installed after the fact. And I highly recommend doing what I just did, which is to keep the blade down in the pocket until it's completely done. That really helps prevent that piece. Otherwise, when you lift that blade up, if the blade is spinning, this piece is going to come up with it, and a lot of times it sucks it right in there. So if you leave that blade down in there until it comes to a complete stop, and you can see what happened, it just sat there, the cutoff, which is pretty cool. So there's my cutoff. One of the things I'm going to show in the what went right and what went wrong is I have too much of a gap in there, even for Gorilla Glue. I don't need that much. So what I did was, after I made this one, prototype number 1, right, I went back and I tweaked the shaper so that this piece right here, the tongue, is going to actually go up in there a little further on both sides. And yet it'll still allow enough space. I want that full 3-inch between there. I'll still end up with that, I think. And I'll know once I finish prototype number 2. So I'm going to flip it and do the... All right, so that's as much as I can do right now with that. I've sanded it and everything else. Now, the next step is going to be applying the joinery. And again, if I look at the sequence, should I have varnished it first and then, wait a day, varnish it this afternoon, and then tomorrow I can sand it and then varnish it again and wait. But I found that there's no reason with the type of joinery that I'm going to use and with the method that I'm using to build these, that I can apply the joinery now to this side of it, and then I can go through the whole varnish process, which again is, for me, it's always oil-based varnish. It just brings out the grain so much better than water-based latex. And so there's always at least a 12-hour period between the first and second, between the first coat before I can sand for the second, and then there's maybe a 6 or 7 hour after that. But so anyways, this is really it. And the next phase of this is going to be installing the joinery. Okay, so it's about 6 o'clock at night. Perfect time for doing a little varnishing. What I'm using, and again, I'm not sponsored by anybody, so when I say it, I mean it. I really like Minwax, the fast drying polyurethane. I've been going to a warm gloss for a lot of stuff. It's just easier to clean. If you haven't already caught this, I keep my oil-based brushes in water when they're not being used. These are like what, $1 brushes, maybe 95 cents. But if you put them in water after you're done, all you got to do is just go right to varnishing. I usually shake them out a little bit. And again, this isn't a piece of fine furniture, right? This is a prototype. So this will allow me to go ahead and I just keep on varnishing. I'm not constantly buying new brushes and not changing brushes all the time. And then if you're using threaded tenons, my threaded tenons, there's nothing wrong at all with varnishing the tenons. In fact, it doesn't even hurt to get it in the threaded area in the center hole. But what it does is actually puts a coat of weather protectant over it, and it's going to have less reaction because these are just mild steel. They're not stainless steel, right? So, and there's always a little bit of moisture in wood, and that way it just has a little more protection for a lot longer time. It doesn't seem to be an issue that they're mild steel when they're used for interior use, even when you take them apart and put them back together all the time. But I'm doing that, and then I'll show you kind of another advantage. I don't have what you can do is you can actually, when you're varnishing stuff, is you can put a threaded bolt in there and then you can hang your piece. I just don't have a setup for it right now. Other than that, we're all varnished, and just a little bit of catching the drips kind of thing here going on. And then tomorrow I'll sand it a little bit and put another coat on, and then we're basically ready to go. Boy, does that suck! That raw wood really sucks up that varnish the very first time through. There we go.